So for the last few weeks I've been seeing a lot of videos on YouTube called Iceberg videos. And after doing some very minor research, I found a couple lists that cover The Office. Now, because I haven't found a video that goes through any of these lists, and because I'm not currently paying for Peacock and am going through The Office withdrawal while I wait for my box set to show up, I figured this would be a good video idea to do in the meantime. If you've clicked on this, you're probably at least somewhat aware of how an Iceberg video works, but if you haven't, they typically go as follows. They start with things that are kind of base knowledge or something that most people who watch the show would have some kind of knowledge of, which is just the tip of the iceberg. And as you go below the surface and deeper into the water, things get more and more obscure and sometimes weird. For this video, I'll be kind of picking and choosing from a couple different iceberg charts because, well, I can and I want to. There's a couple things on each of these charts that I think are worth talking about and a couple that aren't. I'll link these down in the description if anything here catches your eye and I don't touch on them. And I'd think this would go without saying, but obviously this video will talk about a lot of things throughout the entirety of The Office, so consider this your official spoiler warning. And hey, while we're here, comment down below what you'd like to hear me talk about next. It definitely helps the algorithm not hate my channel. And follow me on Twitter at 10kbill to stay up to date on everything I'm working on. Toby being the Scranton Strangler is the most widely known theory. There's a good bit of videos already done on this, and it's been borderline confirmed by the creators of The Office, with videos on their own channel. But it really boils down to Toby actually being the Scranton Strangler, the murderer who was lurking around the streets of Scranton throughout much of the series. There's a solid amount of evidence littered throughout the show's run. Next is the change in appearances between the first and second season, the biggest example of this being that of Michael Scott. But there's also the fact that they had a different building as Dunder, Mifflin, Scranton in the first season as well. This is pretty easily explained by an increase in budget and a more consistent vision, but can also be explained as the US show really beginning to take on its own personality, with Michael originally looking more like David Brent from the British version of the show. With the pilot episode being basically the same as the British pilot, as the show was renewed, it really started to find its own identity, and the characters' changing appearances really helped to reflect that. Background characters. So throughout the series we obviously see a huge number of characters in the background, with many becoming more and more regular as the seasons go by. But the weirdest background characters in terms of what it means for the show are the background office workers in the pilot. Most of the characters are really only seen in the background of this episode and then never mentioned again, while some characters who weren't even supposed to have lines, like Creed, become mainstays for the show. We'll start this part of the video with Angela's crush on Pam's former fiancé, Roy. There are a few small interactions that seem to point to this being true. In The Secret, while Angela and Phyllis are in the kitchen and they're cleaning out the fridge, Phyllis asks Angela who she'd pick if she were in Pam's shoes, Jim or Roy, and she very clearly says she would prefer Roy. While this doesn't necessarily prove anything, a game like that would typically be beneath Angela. But in the Office Lady podcast, a podcast that's going through the series with Jenna Fischer and Angela Kinsley, they reveal that Angela did indeed have a bit of a thing for Roy. Kevin stealing from The Office is another pretty popular theory. I did a whole video on that a few years back. Check out the channel if you'd like more info. The Office typically shows that even though he's incredibly lazy and underachieving, for much of the series, Jim is generally a good guy. This theory says that's only the case because Jim is actually the person writing The Office. Jim's character culminates in his wife and kids going along with him to work for the sports company he helped found, which coincidentally is pretty darn close to what his dream job was in Second Life earlier in the show. Bob Vance, Vance Refrigeration is a line that's become something of a meme. But as a savvy businessman, Bob Vance, Vance Refrigeration might just be taking advantage of the free publicity that he could get from a documentary taking place right next door. So every time we see Bob Vance, Vance Refrigeration, he's really just doing what any good businessman would do in his situation: advertise. In Season 3, we see the Stanford branch play Call of Duty as a team building exercise. But Jim is hilariously bad at this game, something that he actually ends up admitting himself. But what makes this kind of weird is that in an earlier episode, Jim actually has a Call of Duty expansion pack on his desk. Apparently, the creator of the show, Greg Daniels, was kind of obsessed with Call of Duty. Originally, he just wanted to sneak a cameo in for the show, but then later in Season 3 decided to use it as a whole plotline. But that doesn't necessarily explain why Jim is bad at the game. unless he just bought an expansion pack by mistake and never played the actual game. While it's made painfully obvious that Michael isn't the father of Jan's daughter Astrid, it's hinted that it could actually be somebody else in the office. When Kevin is able to state which sperm bank she went to and even states that he donates there, there's a look of what can only be described as panic on Jan's face. Though she would likely know if it was Kevin and not actually Hunter, who is actually probably the father. Early in Jim and Pam's relationship, they go through a pretty trying time when Pam heads off to New York for art school. They get through this hardship, and after Pam fails art school, she moves back and all is well between the two. But what if Pam didn't actually fail? What if she just lied about failing? Pam would have known long before she broke the news to Jim that she was failing. She may have been testing Jim to see if he would turn out like Roy, which is why she's so emotional when he tells her to finish school. This one isn't technically a theory because it is outright stated on the show, but it's not a super well-known deleted scene. So there's a scene where Phyllis is talking about her and Bob Vance Refrigeration's honeymoon. Their honeymoon is a safari in Africa, and late one night, Bob was driving after some drinks and hit something. Or someone. They didn't exactly stop to check. But what they did do is drive away as fast as they could, bribe the airport, and flee the country. So it seems like Phyllis and Bob Vance Refrigeration probably killed someone and are highly unlikely to ever get caught. This is also not really a theory and more of a random fact. But Jim's hair in much of season 3 looks, well, weird. And that's because Jim is actually wearing a wig. John Krasinski was in the middle of filming Leatherheads for much of the season and wore his wig until his big haircut later in the season. The next theory is something that's touched on by Mulverine on his channel. The basis of this is that Meredith is who Pam would have become had she actually married Roy. If you want more on this theory, I'll link it down in the description. Now, with all the shenanigans that we see in the office, we don't always see a ton of paper being sold. We also hear repeatedly that Dunder Mifflin is losing money throughout most of the series. This theory revolves around the documentary crew actually buying paper consistently and actually keeping the Scranton branch in business as a result. We know that the documentary aired on PBS, so it's not out of the realm of possibility that the Scranton branch would have made a big PBS deal for paper. Radon is something that Toby brings up time and time again throughout the entirety of The Office's run. This theory just states that, well, Toby was right, and this would explain the Flanderization of the characters that we see, or explain any weird decisions that anyone would make. The radon was simply affecting their brains the entire time and pumping them full of toxic gas. During the final season of the show, there's a bit of a shift in the relationship between Jim and Pam. The theory that believes this culminates in Jim cheating on Pam during his time in Philadelphia. The documentary went out of their way to try and cover it up to push the narrative that they were trying to sell during the show. It seems like just about every show has some variation of the theory they were all dead and in hell the entire time. And, of course, The Office is no exception. There's a couple different versions of this theory, but the main one that I've seen revolves around Stanley being dead and in hell. It definitely makes sense that Stanley's hell would be spending eternity at the office, though this theory doesn't really explain why he's able to eventually retire. Tom is a character who's really only mentioned maybe once in the show's run. He's a character who committed suicide before the show's run, but the writers apparently had a few ideas that never really made it into the show involving Tom and his suicide. Or at least that's what they said during a writer's Q&A. For starters, not only was this the reason that Ryan got hired as a temp to fill Tom's position, but it was supposedly the reason that the documentary crew started filming in Scranton in the first place. And in fact, the entire office supposedly had attended Tom's funeral the day that the first episode was filming. While Toby might be the most popular candidate for the Scranton Strangler, there's also plenty of people out there who think it might actually be Andy. While the evidence isn't as substantial as it is for Toby, there are a few things that could point towards him. Mainly his anger issues, his love to create characters, and then in the final season, Andy even refers to Andy Bernard as a character. Creed wants a lot during his time at the office, from handstands to just get away with whatever it is he does. But ultimately, it seems like his goal is to find the Loch Ness Monster. Not only does he bring up the Loch Ness Monster by name, but also at one point says,
"If I can't scuba, then what's this all been about? What am I working toward?"
This next theory posits that Dwight, at least in the early seasons of the show, is unable to tell the difference between fantasy and reality. He says that he shot his neighbor's dog, mistaking it for a werewolf. He doesn't completely rule out that the Ben Franklin impersonator might actually be Ben Franklin, and fully believes that he can raise and lower his cholesterol at will. The Leslie eye incident refers to when filming the episode Beach Games, Rainn Wilson accidentally kicked sand in the eye of Leslie David Baker, the actor who played Stanley. Baker had to be rushed to the hospital and ended up suffering from a scratched cornea. This is also talked about in episode 52 of the Office Ladies podcast. Go listen to them after this video and tell them I sent you. That's where we'll end this video for now. If you like this video, comment down below if you'd like to see me do more content like it in the future. Follow me on Twitter at 10GayBill to stay up to date on everything I'm working on. Support us on our Patreon if you like this show and want to see more like it. And of course, make sure you subscribe for all your entertainment-related content.